We look at the specific examples of specific sports here in Sport Depth 4. Basketball, soccer, field hockey. So some of the factors here is that we want to make sure that they have a decent amount of LSD work so that they can handle long periods of aerobic work. In this case, most basketball players, most soccer players, they need to be able to do work for a long period of time. They need to be able to go into a competitive state and uphold 85 to 90% for a long period. And then as we start to mine deeper, we might see, okay, this person falls off later in the game, or this person has success later in the game, and that's going to tell us, what we need to be working on. So that would show us potentially where their VO2 max is. If they die off later on in the game, they might have a lower VO2 max. We can use things like analyzing sprint performance to see where those drop-offs are going to be, and then we can also just get into specific discussions with the sport coach. What's the GPS data tell us for an individual if they are struggling to uphold that generalized thought process within practice or within competition? And then finally, we can just look at what are the benchmarks telling us. So if we test them and we evaluate them through these benchmark tests, now we can start to see what their speed looks like, we can see what their strength looks like, we can see what their explosiveness looks like, and then most importantly, we can test them on a 1 mile run, we could even test them on a 5K run here if we would like to, and then that's gonna give us some more feedback or more data around what that individual struggle is. Yeah, so this would be how we apply it. This would be where they're doing their game simulations, where they're doing their technique work, where they're gonna be doing their sprint-based training. And you can see here the sprint aspect, what they're going to do for their endurance work here, some type of easy endurance versus a little bit more intense, and even factoring in these days in their lifts with their specific endurance scenarios. But the main point here is that we've got to study their GPS if they have access to that. We have to know how much running they're doing in practice, and there is even some examples that you can even pull off of like an Apple Watch if you have an athlete that has an Apple Watch. We should try to get some VO2 max analysis as well, because that's going to help us further understand that. From a general perspective, if we have an athlete that's an endurance cyclist, a marathoner, or a triathlete, they need to be able to go for 2 to 4 hours with minimal fatigue. And that sounds insane, but from a general perspective, we have to be able to have that athlete handle that. Now, the irony here is that all of their endurance work is their sport, literally all of it. So when we're looking at Sport Depth 4, I would say their endurance work is about 80% from their sport. In this realm, we are only going to be training their explosiveness, their strength, and their speed. So we can look at this athlete and say, if we can actually impact cadence or pace, we're gonna do that from increasing their speed or increasing their explosiveness through plyometrics and things along those lines. We are not going to have much of an impact on their overall endurance because that's all they're doing within their specific sport. Now we want to look at the individual athletes and we want to see if we can test their VO2 max, where are they at? We should be able to see where they're at so we can have an improvement off of that. We want to see what their recovery heart rate is within the first minute of doing some type of interval work. We want to make sure that we're talking with the actual sport coach. That's going to help us work through some of the different scenarios in practice or competition. And then we need to test them with their benchmarks so we can see where they're at individually. Once we can test them and compare their numbers to other people in that realm or in that sport depth, that's going to help us analyze where they're at. And this would be what most endurance athletes would be doing. Most endurance athletes would do some type of, let's say if we have a marathoner, they might go out and do, let's say, 10 to 12 miles. The next day, they might come back and they might do 4-minute hill sprints here, so some threshold work, and then afterwards, they're gonna do some mobility or some strength work. The next day following that, they might do some tempo work or another 10 to 12 mile run, 15-mile run potentially. Day 4, that's where we're gonna come into play and hit some speed work. Okay, so they might do 8 50-meter sprints. Athlete day to work on their plyometric work, and then they come back for more LSD work, threshold work on day 6. So that's sort of how that exactly would be laid out. And we want to make sure that we're focusing on speed at least once a week, strength, and the strength work is almost entirely built around just improving their mobility and making sure they're structurally stable. So when we look even further into this specifically at training endurance, going deeper, the sarcoplasmic work that we're going to start to apply, or we'll go into sarcoplasmic interval and long slow distance, would be if we're training sarcoplasmic work, I like to use examples like a drop set. So work up to a 5-rep max, let's say, for athletes. And most sarcoplasmic work we will be doing from Keystone down to Sport Depth 1, strength and power. So a drop set for that might be done on the main lift, like a bench press. Let's say we work up to a 5 rep max and then we drop about 20 to 40 pounds and we do an immediate set of like 10 to 17 reps with that drop in weight. Big sets would be an example of pairing 4 to 6 exercises in a row and keep working through those each exercise set by set by set in a repetitive fashion. A mechanical drop set would be, we do a hard movement first. So let's say we do a front squat first. After a front squat, we do a goblet squat. After a goblet squat, we do a leg extension. That's a form of sarcoplasmic work for a mechanical drop set. And then here, isolation burnouts would be preacher curls to failure, tricep extensions to failure. That's when we have some type of localized endurance problem, and that would look like this here. So here, chin up. Okay, so look at the chin up right here. Chin up is gonna be 5 reps, 5 reps, 5 reps. And then we're gonna do a drop set of 12. With the front squat, you're gonna do 4 sets of 4 reps, pretty heavy. And then we're gonna do a drop set of 7. So you're gonna slightly decrease the load and really push that set of 7. Isolation burnout would be a leg extension. 3 sets of 25, that's gonna show you how we set up that isolation burnout. Now, when we're looking at endurance training specifics, if I'm looking at an interval training examples, I have here intensity is low intensity or high intensity. I like to think about this meaning timeline. So really this should be low volume, higher volume, or moderate volume. But in this case, if we have 10 to 15 minutes that we're putting somebody through an interval session, 10 to 15 minutes. And a lot of athletes don't want to do endurance work because of time. But if we look at it and say, okay, we got 10 to 15 minutes, we can use it to bot a protocol. Okay, so this would be, you got 4 minutes, you go 20 seconds of an activity, then you rest for 10 seconds. 20 seconds of an activity, rest for 10 seconds, and you do it for 4 straight minutes. So let's say you're doing kettlebell swings. 20 seconds of kettlebell swings, 10 seconds break. It's 4 minutes. If you do 2 of those, that's 8 total minutes. That is a lot of endurance work, and it's only taking you about 8 minutes to get it done. But it's effective, and that's where that could be used for wrestlers, that could be used, if we've got a soccer player that struggles with their interval work. Even an offensive lineman, you could use sled pushes, for an example. 3 sets of 5 minutes. This might take you 15 minutes of work. It probably would take you about 22 minutes of an actual workout. This is called the Yvonne Escott Special. 3 sets of 5 minutes on the assault bike. Okay, try to hold 70 RPMs. Work towards that. It might take you 6 months to get to this. But if you do that, 5 minutes on the assault bike at 70 plus RPMs, your endurance is gonna go up, and that's only gonna take you about 20 minutes to light load on a Metcon. So a Metcon could look like 5 deadlifts, 5 box jumps, 20 kettlebell swings, rest 30 seconds, repeat that for 12 straight minutes to see how many reps you can get in. That's more like the CrossFit style workout. Now, the high intensity interval work, this is where I'm gonna bring in on the minute coordination. I think use an example of like 15 sets of 1 on the minute for a clean off of a 1 box. The Ronstadt protocol, this is probably one of the best that you can use for increasing VO2 max. This would be 30 seconds on, 15 seconds off, 9 times through. It takes about, I wanna say it takes 9 minutes. Now the thing is with this is you would then typically rest about 2 minutes and repeat it. And ideally you would be able to do that 2 to 3 times. The 4 to 6 minute high pace tempo runs for 4 to 6 sets. This might look like if we've got a soccer player or a lacrosse player, they struggle with a 5K, we can figure that out. Okay, their 5K is not good. We've got to figure that out. Okay, let's run a half mile at a 6 minute pace. Then they would run for 2 minutes at a 13 minute pace. And that's a tempo run that will get you in shape very, very quickly. And this is all work that if you can do this for 2 weeks, you're gonna get in really, really good shape within 2 weeks. If you can do this for 6 months, you'll be indestructible with your endurance. A 3-to-1 work to rest ratio on the rower or on the assault bike. So this is where you might do, let's say for simple math purposes, 6 straight minutes at pretty high intensity on an assault bike, and then you then rest for 2 minutes and then you repeat that again. And this is pretty similar to the 3x5 minutes. All right, we've got, when I look at LSD work, I look at easy LSD work, so 30 to 60 minutes. I look at hard LSD work, 1 to 3 hours. That's hard. So guys, this is exactly what we're doing. This is literally the interval work here is our strength coach at South Dakota State takes the team and the team has to do this and they have to record it and they've got a leaderboard. The individual is expected to do this. And what's interesting is that typically what we can see is that if they're not recording this, they're not doing it. And if this isn't improving on a week-to-week basis, they're not doing it. So then we can see as a coach what's happening. Looking at this work and being able to apply this individually for your own specific scenarios is gonna help you see how we would lay out that entire week. And I think as a coach, it's much easier to apply and to put your athletes through interval work than it's going to be with the LSD work. So the LSD work is going to really come back to the individual. Okay, so this is some examples. Like, this is going to be optimal, and this might take a couple years to get to here. But really, we want to make sure that how are they recovering from session to session. If we see an individual athlete that struggles and their coach is saying they're missing a lot of their 5th attempt, their 6th attempt in clean and jerks. In the realm of soccer or even ice hockey, like 3rd period, they're dying and they can't stay focused. Like, those are things that we want to hear, because then that's going to key us on what's going on. And even if we have these benchmark tests and we're testing them quarterly on these results, now we can go back and sort of figure out where's their problem. And then we take that problem and then we apply the solution to their problem in this weekly layout. When we're thinking about Sport Depth 3, this is going to be the keystone Sport Depth. This is an athlete like a wrestler, combat fighter, MMA, even a climber, rower, anybody along those lines. We've got to think about, they're going to have an opponent, okay, so they have to be strong. They're going to have that opponent and they might be working for 6 minutes, 8 minutes, 3 5-minute rounds. So they need to be strong, they need to have good endurance, they need to have explosiveness, and they need to be able to recover well inside of their training. Those are the basics around a keystone, and this is their training focus ratio that we use to then lead into how we set up their programming. This is going to be their specific examples of, like, this is a value that we want to see within 6 months to a year of training this individual. Okay, this is how we want to make sure, how well are they recovering from different aspects in training? How well are they executing maybe even like an on-the-minute clean or anything like that? What is the coach noticing when they're doing their live drilling in practice? What is the coach noticing from repetitive climbs or through the races if you're a canoeer or a rower? And then these are the tests that we use to figure out what's going on and where are we seeing some type of error, even using something like the 5K run to help us determine what their LSD is versus the value of their LSD versus their interval work. So that's sort of how to lay that out and then take that information, the weaknesses, and then apply it through this type of layout on a weekly basis.